Ladies, gentlemen, and strangers from 9gag, welcome back to your cybersecurity series. My name is Vlad, and in today's video, we will explore one of the most famous heists in the history of cybersecurity. It's called Carbanak, and basically, the prejudice was estimated between 350 to $1 billion. This Carbanak attack, or should I say, series of heists, because multiple banks were targeted, it happened between 2013 and 2015. And if you think that's old, you can just remember that Batman, The Dark Knight Rises, which I use as a cover page, is basically dated from 2008. So I think we have established already two things. First, time flies, and second, the masterpieces, they never age, which is why you need to learn about Carbanak, because this is a striking example and it will really illustrate the attack sequence that we discussed in the previous video. Also, if you are wondering why in this course we are focusing so much on the financial sector, there was this question that the FBI asked to Willie Sutton. So Willie Sutton was a bank robber in the United States, formerly even part of the fugitives top 10 list. And basically, when they asked him, why do you target banks? He answered, and this answer became famous afterwards, because this is where the money is. And this is exactly what the attacking group, which was called Carbanak, had in mind. They basically targeted hundreds of financial institutions and banks in between 2013, which was the date of the initial identification and, let's say, investigation revealed that some of the banks as early as 2013 were compromised by that group of hackers until approximately 2015. The entire investigation and the screenshots that I will use in this video are coming from the Kaspersky report. So Kaspersky is a Russian company in security. They do famous antiviruses. And basically, they were the ones who initially identified this group of hackers. And they produced a very interesting report with all the findings, all the indicators of compromises that they released also to the public to warn the institutions. So we will see quite a lot of screenshots from Kaspersky, and I have the link of their report at the very end. So basically, in terms of victims, as I said, hundreds of banks all around the world, mostly in the US and in Russia, even though the hackers were estimated to be located in Russia and Ukraine at the time. And you can see that there were banks targeted also in Western Europe, Canada, Brazil, India, China, Australia. And the average loss for a bank was between $2.5 million to $10 million, which is why the gap is so huge in terms of prejudice. And that's also only including the reported losses. So obviously, it might be bigger than that. But altogether, we have a range between $350 million losses to $1 billion. So how did it work? If you remember our attack sequence, basically the step one is always the recon. So learning who you have in front of you, who are the targets, how can you exploit them. And basically, this is what they did. First of all, they identified who are the employees within the bank. And once they had that, they moved into the step two, which is the weaponization. They crafted a malware. And at the time, there was one famous vulnerability on Microsoft Word. And basically, they inserted malicious attachments within the emails. Sending the emails is the step three. So once you have done the recon, you have crafted your malware, so which is the weaponization. Step three is the delivery. Here, they opted for emails and directly reaching out to the employees. In total, for a single bank, sometimes they infected up to hundreds of employees. And the idea is that they were looking for specific profiles, in this case, administrators. So the admins, of course, they have special privileges. And sometimes they have different software that they can use to administrate the network or to process certain payments. And that's exactly what they were looking for. Then in our attack sequence, you have the step 4 and step 5, which is basically the exploitation and the installation. So once they had identified those people with the right privileges and the ability, for example, to process payments, they were deploying the malware. So the malware is basically the computer virus. And the idea, which I find absolutely smart, and this is why this heist is one of a kind. This malware was just recording screens. and it was taking screenshots every 20 seconds. And they were really spying, sometimes over months, on the administrators. And they were looking at the screens, they were looking at the screenshots, understanding the different menus, understanding which account is used to do which action, what can they do within the software interfaces. Um, so they were learning almost as a regular employee. So they were arresting all those intelligence, intercepting the banking clerk's screens, learning about the ropes, what can you do, what raises also alerts. So again, that was really a smart way of attacking, because when you think about it, they were not exploiting any vulnerabilities specific to a single software. Because the problem with this type of attack is that you would only be able to infect certain banks or certain financial institutions which are using a dedicated software. But here, they were just recording screens. So this attack could be really reproduced on any of the bank, any of the configuration. And that's where the genius part of this heist is. And then, so once we have done the installation, and as I said, the exploitation, which is basically running this malicious piece of software, then we move into step 6, which is the command and control, and step 7 of our attack sequence, which is the action on objectives. So once the malware was installed, basically it was waiting for certain orders from the command and control servers. So basically a server that is handled by the attackers, and they were sending instructions. And depending on those instructions, they could do a lot of different actions. But basically, this was about stealing the money. So they could transfer money from the bank's accounts to the fraudster's account. They could do e-payments. They could also manipulate the account balances and extract cash out of those accounts. They could even control the ATMs, so the automated teller machines. So basically, the machines that are giving away the cash, the physical cash. And the idea is that they were sufficiently coordinated so that when they press the button and they say, okay, on this account, we will push out $10,000 of cash, there was an accomplice on the ground in a certain country that was just inserting a card or just giving fake instructions, typing some account numbers and retrieving the cash. So this is really to give you also a perspective of what organized crime can do. And that was 10 years ago. So now they have evolved even further. But it's not really about a single guy or two. It's about an entire network of people identifying targets, defining a specific malware, learning about financial software, being on the ground also, just as narco traffic. They have people on the ground to collect and process payments. In this investigation, so as I said, Kaspersky, they identified the hackers, they identified how they were working, everything about their modus operandi has been now published. And at the time, they released this communication that every bank should know about. And basically, they gave them some practical, technical information saying, well, if you find these elements on your systems, then you might be compromised. And basically, they were telling them, as you can see on the right, well, if you have files with a certain .bin extension, then look in this particular specific folder, which was a folder of Mozilla Firefox. If you have something here, then might be a trace of compromised. And I will give you some more practical, technical examples of the entire workflow. And everything I'm about to describe here is really based from the Kaspersky report, and I will put the link into the description of this video. This is quite technical, but it also gives you an understanding of the full timeline, because they did the analysis on the malware, they did the analysis using several also platforms, and you can really see from when the event started, who tried to investigate, who understood certain elements and pieces of the software. So it was really a team effort, not only by Kaspersky, but about the entire community. And all of that is summarized into approximately a 20-page report, which I find personally super interesting. So the step 0, once they have infected, of course, a victim via an email, the idea, as we discussed, is that the email was embedding a malicious attachments. This attachment could be either a malicious Word document, Microsoft Word, or a CPL file. A CPL file is just a specific configuration file for Windows, which allows you to make some modifications on the control panel. But for the sake of simplification, we will only look at Word documents. Once they have that, basically, and the malware is really a small piece of malicious code. Basically, it pretends to be svc host.exe, and this is a famous process within the Windows environment. This executable is basically running all of the services, or let's say optimizing the services on a Windows machine. And this is a really common technique for most of the, I mean, I'm not saying most, but very often that we see from the malware, they pretend to be a legitimate process. So here they were renaming themselves svchost.exe, and they were setting a base within the system32 folder. So the system32, it's quite famous on Windows. It's only on Windows. There is no equivalent really on Linux systems or Mac systems. The idea is that this is a protected folder where Windows hides all of its internal processes and everything that works, or make sure that Windows can run as an operating system. Everything is within the system32, which is why you could see a lot of jokes on internet a few years ago saying, well, just delete system32, don't worry about it. Well, if you try to do that, first of all, you will be rejected because only an administrator can do. But if you manage to delete some of the contents there, you might crash the entire system because those are essential components for Windows to run. So basically, that's really the idea of this initial compromise. Thanks to this malicious world attachment, they were registering as a privileged service. So they had a system, what we call system level privileges. And then they were creating another service. And so that might be perhaps a bit confusing on why they would do that. The idea is that, and that's also a technique we see a lot, the virus creates another process and makes it look like legitimate process. So this child service, they configure it in a way and they give them what we call auto run privileges. So the idea is that even if you shut down and restart the laptop or the computer, this service will resume on boot. So that's what we call auto run privileges. And why would they create a second service rather than using the one that they have at the beginning? The idea is that this first service, svc host.exe, could be easily identified, and most of the time they just kill themselves. So the computer programs stop and erase all of the traces. So the idea is that it's much more harder for the investigator to make the link between this new child service that was created and the original compromise. So it's kind of adding steps, adding elements to make the attack a bit more complex and less noticeable. Once they have done that, this child service, and we see that in the entire attack sequence, there is a step which is called exploitation and installation. So the malware, which is really small, needs a base of operation to put all of its extensions, payloads, etc. And that for that they selected the Mozilla, which is why, as part of the Kaspersky recommendations, they were telling people to look at specific folders within Mozilla Firefox configuration files, because that was the base of operations of the malware. Having said that, as we said, the step 5 and 6 is to receive orders from a command center. And as you can imagine, if you are into the bank infrastructure, it's not always obvious that you can reach out to the wider internet. So one of the things they needed to do was to get the proxy configuration from Firefox. And basically, it allows them to understand whether or not they can establish a remote connection with the outside world, so everything that is outside the bank, and receive those communications back. So that's also an important step, because if you deploy a malware in an infrastructure that is isolated, you no longer have the opportunity to really drive and give them orders and progress in your attack. And that's really also something you need to understand. The malwares, most of the time when they are sent into an infrastructure, they are super small. They are thin because the more you put into the malware, the more options, the more it can be noticeable by the defense and security solutions. So usually you want to send in a very tiny malware, and then you want to establish a remote connection, and you will push additional content, additional tools, and the malware will grow and be more sophisticated. If you send a huge payload right from the beginning, yes, of course, then the malware can progress on its own. However, you lose, I mean, you, let's say you lower your chances of not being recognized. So once they have this proxy configuration, they basically establish a remote connection with the command and control server, so what we call the C2 server, and they download certain plugins. Of course, as I said, new tools to continue the attack. That allowed them to log all the keystrokes and all the screenshots every 20 seconds. And after that, they were enabling connections to the infected computer, meaning that the attackers could even connect directly to the infected systems. And that's the end of the story. Basically, if the Carbanak malware was detecting certain banking applications, so here they were especially monitoring two of them, one which is called Blitzco, which is a fund transferring software, and the other one was iFops, which is also another banking application. So every time that those applications were identified through the screenshots, then someone would connect and benefit from those sessions and basically change the payment details. And so it was really, as I'm writing here, it was really orchestrated so that every time that there is an opportunity to steal cash or modify a payment, then the attackers are notified. And that basically concludes this story on Carbanak. I know this one was a bit more technical, but I just wanted to really illustrate our 7 steps attack sequence that we discussed in the previous episode and give you a practical example. So again, what you can remember is this entire chain here that we have. First, they do the reconnaissance. They understand who they have in front of them. They try to find the right people with the right privileges, so the IT administrators. So in your personal job, in your day-to-day, if you have certain responsibilities, you need to be aware that you can be an exposed target as well. If you are working within the finance department and you have the opportunity to process payments, validate invoices, you are more at risk than a regular employee. Once they had done that, they crafted a smart piece of malware which was recording keystrokes and recording screens. They learned sometimes for months again. So don't think that an attack is always a question of minutes. An attack can be prepared over significant periods of time, like here in this example. And finally, they were mimicking the staff using the same credentials, using the same techniques, the same instructions in order to cash out significant sums. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed. I personally find this Carbanak example quite striking because it's completely genius. They found a way to infect hundreds of banks regardless of this infrastructure, and I think this is just. I find it amazing, so to speak. I hope you enjoyed this story, and see you soon for another video.